Good afternoon to everyone. Today is a great day to be a Wildcat. My name is Lourdes Genao. I am UNH class of 2004, and I am part of the UNH Alumni Association Board of Directors. I am excited to share with you an exciting book about empowerment, but also want to remind everyone that we are in the middle of the 603 challenge for UNH, and we're looking for participation for alumni. So if you have a moment, please take a moment and click on the link and donate. We are looking for donations that help students in all kinds of ways, and you can choose what you want your money to be utilized towards. For example, I used my money to donate to the business school, who funds study abroad programs for UNH students. So today we're here to talk about the Breaking the Glass Ceiling book. We started this journey about a year ago, and it's a group of women coming together to share stories, all becoming very vulnerable and sharing some stories, some very personal things about our lives, but really with the intention of sharing so that we can help others, so that we can help others understand that no matter the struggle, that there is a way to overcome. We didn't expect this, but the book became a #1 bestseller in over 7 categories in over 7 countries on Amazon. And we have been overwhelmed with that response and have been asked what's next. And one of the things that we as a group are doing is we started a foundation called the Inspirational Latina Foundation, so that we can keep the momentum of the book going. The foundation is dedicated to those exact things, to figure out how to help women grow, how to help women overcome, how to help women grow spiritually. And so today we're going to have a panel discussion with just a few of the authors that took part of the book. And it's going to be moderated by Judy Veras Bueno. I'm going to read to you a little bit about Judy because she is truly an amazing woman. So she is the founder of the Inspirational Latina Foundation and the current president. She is a transformational life coach, a fearless women's advocate, speaker, 2-time best-selling author, and host of the Inspirational podcast. Despite her struggles with eating disorders, anxiety, and depression, Judy has become a fearless speaker for women everywhere. So with that, I leave you with Judy, who will lead us in discussion, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Awesome, everybody. Thank you so much for the beautiful introduction, Lourdes. It's a pleasure, especially whenever you are part of something. We want to be part of something because Lourdes is really, truly a champion. So we wanted to say first, thank you to UNH for having us today and having that space for us. This this project means a lot to us. So the first thing we want to say is let's hold space for these ladies, because they're gonna, like Lourdes said, they're going to share some personal stories, things that are really coming from the heart. So when we do this thing, we're not looking for pity, we're not looking for any of that stuff. We are doing it with the heart, with the idea, with the ability to understand, to know that we can bring change as we share a story, and that as we inspire all the women and all the people, other individuals that are going through something and struggling to do the same. So it is an honor for each one of us here today. I want to encourage everybody. We're going to have a Q&A toward the end. So as you listen to the ladies speak, you can write down your question. Don't wait until the end to write your question, so that way we have the chance to read them and to be able to answer them, and so that we keep the time in mind. So today we're going to talk about, breaking the glass ceiling in terms of what it means to belong. What is identity? Why identity, belonging is so important. And one of the things that I was reading, this Eastern Washington University, they wrote a report on belonging, especially on Latino students. The report called Latinos Breaking the Barrier of College Education Completion. And they were saying that when someone feel like this student, the Latino student, when they start the college experience, there's a culture shock, right, for them. Like it's they become, there's racial tensions in the campus, and perception, and they feel like they don't belong. And in the report says when someone feels as if they are not welcome in a community, leaving makes a lot of more sense than staying. And that is a very difficult if you think about that, because the majority of these students, they come into college, and the parents and everybody involved, it's a sacrifice for this community. It's not something that there is plenty of resources for that. So when a student feel like they need to leave because they're not welcome into a community, think about it. It's tough. And for everybody who's listening, I want you to think of a time when you felt that you did not belong in a space, whether it was when you started a new job, whether it was when you went to college yourself, or when you go into a spaces where, like, it feels like you're not accepted. Because what is belonging? Belonging is the need. It's a human need that we have to feel seen, to feel accepted, and to feel like that we are part of something greater. So the need for belonging is a human need. It's not something that is nice to have. It's something that in order for us to grow as a country, as a community, we need to nurture that sense of belonging. And with that, I going to invite you to listen to this amazing group of women who are putting their heart out there. Because the other thing is, when it comes to belonging and being vulnerable, vulnerability take courage. Because vulnerability is exposing yourself to judgment, exposing yourself to misperception. And so today, these women are here to present their story. And it's really, each one of them, for me, they're warrior, because they're able to be vulnerable and speak from their heart. So ladies, and I'm going to start here with Miss Julissa. Please introduce yourself briefly and tell us the name of your chapter and why you name it that way.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Well, my name is Julissa Alvarez, and I have a 27-year career in higher education. And besides that, I also am an entrepreneur mindset, and I currently own 2 businesses, leading and coaching people in hundreds, like over 200 people at the time. The name of my chapter, it's how my accent became my superpower. And the reason why I name it that way is because we are who we are, and we bring in a lot of power no matter where you come from, especially when you come as an immigrant to the United States, and breaking barriers. Thank you, Judy.
That's awesome. Miss Adriana, she is amazing. Like, this woman is like, talking about warrior, this is a warrior woman. Tell us about you, Miss Adriana Gibson.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I am Adriana Gibson. I'm a recently retired Naval Intelligence Officer, Joint Qualified Officer. I was a 30-year career as an air traffic controller and then an intel officer. Upon retirement, I opened 4 businesses. So I have my main businesses are DoD consulting firm, a Brain Trust Property Partners real estate investment company, and then I'm a realtor in California and Florida. My chapter title is Si se puede y con sabor, which means yes, we can, and with flavor. I think it's really necessary to bring your own flavor and spice to everything you do. And I'm huge on encouraging people. So that's why I named it that. Lots to overcome, but nothing can stop us. So.
Awesome. And Miss Jacqueline Vasquez, who I always say she's the most compassionate human I ever met.
Hi, Judy, and hi, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Vasquez, and I am a entrepreneur, 25 years. I'm in the event planning business, And I'm also a women's wellness advocate, an educator, and also an international speaker. I named my chapter The Silent Cry Behind the Smile. And it was a moment that my platform, my journey aligned when the book was coming out. And it was an opportunity for me to share my story and to also help and put out there information as a resource for women as I advocate for women.
Awesome. And Miss Janet Pagan, tell me a little bit about you, and then we go to Nelly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Janet Pagan. I'm in New Jersey. I have been a mortgage banker for the past 26 years, working with the Latino industry and helping the community achieve the dream of homeownership and build a legacy of wealth. My chapter is called Two Stars Aligned because I want to believe that my Latina-ness, being a Latina and female, is a blessing from the skies and that the stars aligned to influence my destiny.
Awesome. How beautiful. Nelly Soto.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Nelly Soto. I am a real estate broker here in the state of New Hampshire, also Massachusetts. I am a real estate developer locally. Recently elected councilwoman in the town of Methuen, Massachusetts, which is where I reside. So for the first time in 300 years, the first Hispanic lady was elected to office. So I'm very proud of that. My book, it's called my chapter, sorry, I Love Hating You. I know it's an oxymoron, but what that means is I have dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome, not only in my career, but as self, as a first generation Latina here in the US. And I want to point something out. This is the only country where we're Latinas. When you're a Hispanic and you're in your country, for example, my background is Dominican, I am Dominicana. And so in the US, we're coined as Latinas. And so my chapter talks about a lot of imposter syndrome, code switching, and how to navigate this environment that we have to constantly switch back and forth from. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's amazing. And that's really important to understand because when we come here to the United States, there is an identity and a culture shock because being a Latino in the Dominican Republic, in Puerto Rico, and Colombia is not the same as being a Latino here in the United States. There is a difference because of the experience that we have to go through, right? So thank you for pointing that out, Nelly. I think that's really important. Chris Fleming.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Chris Fleming. I am an HR executive and I have over 30 years in this human resources field. I'm also an investor in real estate and I own a photography business. My passion has always been photography, but also into mentoring and helping people. My chapter is called Your Table is Not My Table. And I chose this chapter basically to convey to my readers that when one door closes, there's other opportunities on the other side. I also believe wholeheartedly that when you don't feel accepted somewhere, there's other options. You shouldn't put up with, mental abuse and stay, you should look for other opportunities.
Amen. Well said. Miss Lourdes, thank you, Chris, because that's very important that we keep in mind. Sometimes we feel like we're out of choices, and that's why we stayed. Go ahead, Lourdes.
Okay, everyone. My name is Lourdes. As you already know, I'm UNH class of 2004. While I was at UNH, I was a business administration major, but then I added a race, culture, and power minor just because I wanted to balance things. I was also a resident assistant and president of Mosaico, the Latino organization, where we were able to organize events kind of like this one, where we introduce other people on campus and to learn more about each other. I have over 20 years experience in retail and I own a marketing firm. And my chapter is called Island Roots Global Dreams. And I wrote the chapter as my experience really as a first generation in the US, and talked about how I've overcame the different stereotypes and the biases that each of us meets, and how in some cases I even looked at utilizing those to my advantage. I then talk about my power that I exercised in influencing and negotiating. And so anything that I wanted, even though the stats suggested that I shouldn't get that. I shouldn't have been able to afford a college education. I shouldn't have been able to get a master's degree. I had no place in any of those. I decided to utilize those skills to figure out the how, to ask questions and to ask for help. And UNH is specifically mentioned in my chapter because it was my first place where I started to put those skills into action. All I knew was I needed to go to college. My mom said, you have to figure it out. And we had no money. And UNH was a place that not only helped me, but also developed me. So today I have skills that are invaluable as a business person. And, it's one of the best 4 years of my life. And so my chapter has a little bit of UNH and shows that you can do anything despite how hard it looks or how expensive it can be.
Awesome. And this is important for UNH to understand, like the big impact that if that impact, you have that on Lourdes and that allow her to grow, then that's also comes with a lot of responsibility. We just want to point that out because we had this idea that education is, the same for everybody. And we understand that that's not true. There is a lot of lack of resources that Latinos specifically has to face. And so with that, Nelly, would you tell me a little bit about, challenges that you went through as a Latina, navigating in 2 words, and how that impacted you, emotionally, mentally, financially? Go ahead.
Well, I can tell you that in a nutshell, those challenges have helped me become what I call an overachiever, part of the syndrome of that imposter syndrome, right? So what does that mean? I continuously am going after the next thing. I'm continuously growing and trying to help others grow as I navigate, the worlds of mom, career, business. And so, looking at what the imposter syndrome has done for me, I've looked at it as a positive, understanding what it is, holding it there, and checking myself and saying, you know what, you're not going to come after me. And if you read my chapter, it tells you that it still crawls up on me sometimes, but it's given me the resilience to push forward in a lot of things. So if anyone in this community feels that, I'm an imposter when I walk through the door at home because I'm not the best wife or the best mom, just know that, take it one day at a time and know that, push forward through that. In business, I always look at who's doing things that I want to replicate or do better than, not only, and understanding that we all have different seasons of life. And so those are some of the things that have helped me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And that is very important. Jackie, what would you say for you with the challenges that you have to face? I know that in your chapter, you talk about something that people not usually talk about because it's uncomfortable, infertility, faith, and entrepreneurship. So how is those things, the challenges and how those challenges had impacted you?
Well, it's quite interesting because, sometimes we see people that are smiling, right? And we're always smiling. And it's like, you never know what someone's going through behind that smile. And that's why I named my chapter similar to that. And even though for the most part, my life has been a great positive thing, everyone goes through different journeys. And being a Latina, and I know with different cultures, it's something similar as well. But being a Latina, because that's what I understand, that's how I grew up, I basically felt like finding out for the first time what infertility was like it was just a big gasp for me. It was like someone pulled the rug underneath from me, and I thought it was a joke because I'm like the oldest granddaughter, and everyone underneath me, well, my cousins and things like that, were having kids, and I'm like, this was never a conversation. What do you mean? What is it? Is it curable and all that? So it was an impact, not so much on the disease itself, but also on the conversations that, is not had, whether it's through a family or also on the medical side, right? So it's like, who is giving us this education? And the impact is so much more than on a personal level. It's financial, it's, medical. It's to me a very impactful piece by touched by on so many different aspects. So for me, it was something that I had to decide what is motherhood and what is womanhood, right? And redefine motherhood and what that was for me.
And that's really amazing because as part of our identity as a Latinas, like being a mom is like such a huge thing. And how people can be very not understanding there's certain question and comments that we should not be making because you never know how it's impacting those and to other people, right? So
Correct.
yes, so that is very important. Adriana, for you, thank you, Jackie and Nelly, for sharing. Adriana, for you, like what kind of challenges as a Latina, like being in, with your background, which is amazing, and how those challenges impacted you?
Well, part of what I love about the fact that we're sharing this book and the fact that we talk to other women and empower other people is that we all face challenges, right? And I think the most beautiful thing is how we learn to deal with those challenges. So that's basically what I talk about all in my chapter, right? Without giving away too much, it's my family and all the hardships that we faced, and specifically how my parents faced that in such a positive and butt-kicking way that just taught me to do the same. Like, okay, so yes, issues are going to come up, but this is how we deal with them. We never get beat by them. We adapt and overcome. And then being born and raised in the Bay Area, early 70s, I saw nothing but people fighting for their rights. I saw Black people, Chicanos, women, gay people, everybody fighting for their rights. So then that also taught me, okay, we might not have rights immediately, but you can fight for what you want. And so growing up that empowered within my family and then in my community, I kid around with my parents and say I never got the memo that I wasn't supposed to do something. I felt super empowered my entire life. And the beautiful thing, I was able to pass that on to my children. So I have 3 adult children, all went to school on scholarship. My parents were financially able to put all of us children through Catholic school and college. And the beautiful thing is, I thought we were rich. I think this is important. I thought we were rich because we helped everybody in the community. And my parents were from Mexico, moved to California, but all of us were born and raised in California. I thought we were rich because we helped people with food, money, everything. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I found out my dad, no, he said he never made close to 6 figures. He just always knew how to handle his money responsibly. And so to see that way to treat others is also very impactful and also carries on. And that's why I love this community, so we can continue to carry on and empower others as well.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And that's important to understand. That is, yes, it's Latinos, there's a lack of resources, but there is this attitude of si se puede, right? Julissa, how was your experience? And then I'll go with Janet, Chris, and Lourdes. How was your, these challenges and what challenges you face as a Latina, as an immigrant, and how they impacted you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we can relate to each other's because we, in my case, an immigrant, some of you may have been born here, but some others have to face the challenges of learning a new language. And seeing yourself as someone that was capable of leading in institutions or executive roles, I think that has been the biggest challenge, overcoming that transition of being vulnerable in terms of learning the new language, showing up and being able to fight for what you know, because what you have in your head is really what should count, not the way you speak, not the way in the struggles that have come through. And that is where we come from, right? We come from being perseverance, like trying to be resilient in the challenges that we face. And that is really what I faced in my career in higher education, trying to work harder than most of my peers, which is really what it's typical in with the Latino community. It's that we always have to work hard, but guess what? We're not afraid of working hard. And what we need is opportunities and platforms that allow us to continue to grow because we have the ethics, we carry the values of hard work. And what we want is a platform to be treated equally because we're just as powerful as everybody else that lives in the United States, in America, and beyond. So we just want to be that, right? Have and given the opportunity to show up with our brightness, with our attitudes, with our willingness to learn new things. And that's really the challenges that I faced in my career. Thanks, Judy.
That's amazing. Awesome. Thank you. Janet, what about you, my love?
Well, I entered an industry that had been male dominated since its existence. And so I did face a lot of obstacles. My male counterparts would not share anything with me. So I had to work harder than my male counterparts and keep that perseverance. I was, affected. My commissions were shorted because I was a female and Latina. And so I never held back. My innate optimism helped me deal with the situation. I knew that nurturing my relationships with my clients and business contacts was the key to my success, as well as staying up to date, with my industry.
Yeah.
So, I was never complacent about the success of my business, but always maintained that consistency to make sure that my business would stay profitable.
Yeah, and so there's the value of work. I think that's a thing for Latinos, the hard work and consistency. We see questions on the Q&A. Please continue typing your question. That's because we're going to be asking the lady to answer this question toward the end. So Chris, Meli, and Lourdes, challenges and how that impacted you.
So for me, I feel like early on in my HR career, I didn't reach my full potential because I was very insecure about what I had to offer. I was lucky enough to have great managers and mentors that pushed me to apply for that, better opportunity. But I never believed in myself for the longest time, and that affected me financially. I also, even though I had a bachelor's degree and I had, the great HR experience, I still felt ashamed of my accent, as crazy as that sounds. I used to practice and try to change my accent, and I still kept it. I still have it today. And now I celebrate my accent. I'm older and wiser.
Amen.
So, yeah.
And that's important, I think, that because, as an immigrant, like myself coming from the Dominican Republic, like that was a challenge for me is, you do have an accent. And then there's some people that they mean well, but they really do a lot of damage because they're trying to correct you and like, this is how you say it. And sometimes they do it in front of people. And that creates all kind of, so everyone out there who's listening, like, let's, we're talking about inclusion, we talk about diversity. Let's be sensitive to those things, right? Because it's really, really impact you psychologically when you have to deal with that like all the time. Lourdes, go ahead.
So how did it all affect me? I'm listening to every author and I'm nodding, of course. I thought I was rich and I knew I was smart. However, when I show up in a room, people are not thinking either of those two things. And so it is emotionally draining and physically draining when you feel like the world sees you as less, when you know that they see you as less. And one of the things that I did as my mechanism is I became a door-to-door salesperson for Lourdes. And I just started to talk about the things I could do, to talk about the dreams that I had. And, basically, if no one was willing to listen, I'd find someone. As we all know in sales, you can talk to 10 people, but all you need is the one to listen and to believe. And so it's a numbers game. You talk to people, you tell them about yourself, and you tell them what you can do. So that's part of my overcoming. It's continuing to go, continuing to knock, continuing to ask, and finding an audience, that persistence. So, I take a nap and then I get right back up and get going.
I think the nap part is really important because some people don't take the nap, and so they get all overwhelmed. But you need to really ground yourself before you can go into any challenge. So, ladies, I want to ask you something, right? Because all these challenges that you face as immigrants, as Latinas, as women, and you continue to like just fight for what you believe was the right thing for you. The people that are listening here, like, a lot of them, they're not Latinos, right? So what would you say to them? Like, so how do we really do diversity and inclusion in a way that makes more sense? Because everybody's trying to do it, they just don't know. And also a lot of people have fear to ask questions. There's fears to ask questions, right? To have conversations. So what would you say to them? Why don't we start with Nelly?
You know what? I wasn't paying attention. Can you repeat the question? I was actually texting someone. My apologies.
Nah, we know that you're a councilwoman and so that you're very busy. No, basically what we're saying is like, now that we're talking about inclusion, diversity, but how we do it like real, like how we help people, because there are a lot of people who want to help,
Okay, I'll give you a clear example.
they're afraid to ask questions. Go ahead.
So I look at equity and inclusion, like I compare it to dancing, right? Like, or like inviting me to a party. So that's the simplest way. Like, you include me if you invite me to the party, right? But the way I can fulfill me feeling equitable in that space is if I'm invited to the party, but I'm also invited to the dance floor. That's the best way I can point that out. At the end of the day, I look at spaces where I show up daily and I see maybe there's a mom that shows up alone where there's groups of parents that are together. How do we feel that mom cohesively fit into that group? When you're in a space where there's people that have a certain disability, because, we talk about equity and inclusion, a lot of people think about race, gender, sexual orientation, but it's all around us. Look at your environment and see, how can I become cohesive in this environment, but also help others become part and feel cohesive. And that's the way I'm navigating my life daily as I navigate policy as well. So when I'm legislating and I'm looking at certain things that are happening in my community, I look at the big picture, because there's a lot of conversations coming in from traditions and things that the way they have been doing things for generations and years at that table. So I hope that answered the question, and my apologies.
No, we understand. Thank you. That does answer the question. Now this question is for Jackie. I'm taking questions from the Q&A, so just so you know, ladies, they're very interesting questions, and I want to make sure that we make the space for them. It said, thank you, Jacqueline, for sharing. Can you expand on how you redefine motherhood? I also have a struggle with fertility, and it's shifting my life goals unexpectedly.
So actually, that's something I was going to be sharing in one of my replies that I kind of cut in the last one. But the journey that I had with infertility lasted 10 years. And it was a journey that was very quickly leading into a very, very dark space. and I didn't see that myself coming out of it. And so all I thought about was motherhood, because as a Latina, that's what I grew up with. So holding on to that and only seeing it in like straight ahead instead of all the other options, was just like, it was diminishing the light ahead of me. And I can thankfully say that 30 years later, I feel like a breath of fresh air. But what really resonated with me at that time and saved me was my faith. And basically, with that, it helped me redefine motherhood. And what does that mean? Redefining motherhood is really taking an intake of yourself and finding out what truly motherhood means to you. Is it to have the baby? Is it to have the baby yourself or have it through other ways? So really asking those other questions, having conversations with your doctor, having conversations with your partner. All these things have to happen in order for you to really understand, what does motherhood really mean to you? Why do you really want to have a baby? Is it because it was instilled in us because that's what we grew up learning that needed to happen? There are some women who choose not to have babies. And so there's so many things that we need to really understand and really strip down everything surrounding what motherhood is. So for me, motherhood took a different turn because I couldn't no more. I was losing my sense of self, and I was losing who Jacqueline was. And I said, no mas, that's it. I am going to reclaim who I am. And I first need to take a hold of my womanhood so I can then redefine what motherhood means to me. So I
Yeah.
hope that answered that question to that person.
Yeah, and those are very deep challenges and very personal. So thank you, Jackie, for sharing that. This is for Julissa. How do you encourage women working together to help each other instead of being competitive? Sometimes I feel like we are competing to win the resources that are available to women instead of helping one another. That is so true. Go ahead, Julissa.
Wow, this is like speaking to the work that we're doing in the Inspirational Latina Foundation, because we realize that in all the different fields, there's always going to be that kind of competition. And we understand, and part of the work that we've been doing as individual Latina breaking the barriers is that we can make it faster, right? When you go on your own. But guess what? When you build a community and you work together, you can create legacy and bring more people to make an impact in the things that you do. So when I see the work that we're doing as a Latina in the foundation and in general, it's exactly that. We lack community, unfortunately. And when we don't understand the power of working together, we end up stabbing someone in the back, right? Or getting to the finish line because I feel like I'm better. But at the end of the day, if we are working together, we can create a bigger impact. And let me tell you, it's going to show up. It's going to show up in every world, in every field that you're facing and you're working, but it's how you identify that your values are bigger than those things. We are all human beings, and working together, it's really that's going to make an impact. And in the Latino community, is exactly that. We have to help each other because we are better than many of the different scenarios that we see out there. So I encourage everybody to say, you know what? Do I align to the values of having to compete with each other or having to stand out in a way that it's not bringing people together? It's not the right way. And I think that Inspirational Latina has many platforms to show us that that is the way to build and create empowerment within each other. So I hope that answer or inspire someone to continue to build communities as you face these challenges in your field.
Thank you so much. And Lourdes, Inspírame Latina is just for Latinas because it implies in the name. Tell us about that.
So the short answer is no. I think one of the things that I'm taking in as everyone has been speaking is that feeling shame or feeling imposter, feeling like you don't fit in, is really a global pandemic. Everyone has things that make them insecure or that make them feel shame. And so when we get to speak to each other and listen to each other, that is, where that sweet spot that Julissa was talking about really comes alive and flourishes. So the foundation absolutely is not just for women, it is for anyone who is feeling stuck, who is feeling like, I just don't know what's next. I need to figure out what my purpose is. I need some positive energy in my life. That is really what the foundation is about. It's a concentration of smart people who are looking to collaborate and who are looking to help. I think a lot of us have a lot to offer that we want to share, that we've learned over the years, and we've learned that sharing it is really the next step.
Amen. And for that also, we have to, one of the things I think is important is that as you navigate to different spaces, like know where you can be vulnerable or not. There's spaces that being vulnerable is making yourself a target, because not everybody have the emotional capacity or ability to be there with you. And so thank you, ladies, for being vulnerable today. I'm gonna ask this question for Chris and Adriana to answer. Is how do you cope with the accumulative effect of racial battle fatigue as women of color navigating predominantly white spaces? Who wants to start? Adriana?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind when I became an intel, I'm used to being one of the only ones, and I love being one of the only ones because we do, as pointed out, have to prove it. Part of being in the military and being one of the only ones, right? I love that. Okay, I'm going to prove it by running faster, by doing more push-ups, by doing better in class. But when you ask that question, one of the first things that came to mind right after Intel school, I walk into a room. It's literally 19 white men and me, and walking into this meeting. And my inside first goes, oh my God, Adriana, what are we doing here? And then my other Adriana says, we're here to kick everybody's ass. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. So, and I must say, like, I never felt like, oh no, I shouldn't be here. That was that time that it hit me like that. But I immediately came back, and the men that I've worked with, I cannot say how incredible they've been. 90%. Let me be real. 90%. But them sharing with me sharing with them, and just feeling as an equal, presenting myself as an equal, and then them seeing, okay, she's kicking butt. She, and you get that respect too. So them respecting me and me putting in the work that I need to do to prove to, regardless of race, men and anybody around me that needs to know why I'm there. So I think putting in the work and then being friendly, like I'm always friendly with people and sincere with people. I think that goes a long way too, to make them help you and see you as an equal.
Awesome. What about you, Chris? What would you say to that?
Can you repeat the question?
So how do you navigate, let me see, the question was move. Thank you. How do you, okay, so basically it was like, how do we deal with the racial battle fatigue of, like, us women of color navigating through that spaces where, like, predominantly it's only for white men? No offense to the white men.
So basically, how do I navigate? I'm a workaholic, and I feel that I am a good communicator. So the way I navigate is I question things. When something doesn't seem right, I question them. and I'm not afraid to debate. I'm not really sure about the question, so I hope I'm
I
giving.
think no, you basically you nailing the question in the head. Is like asking questions, don't being afraid to speak up, basically, which is it can be challenging when you are dealing with imposter syndrome, right? So thank you. You did answer the question. Somebody is asking, I'm interested to know how you all found each other. How you all found each other through the organization. How do you decide to write the book? Janet, do you want to answer that question?
Yes, actually, we met through, you know, well, I went through an interview to be part of the book, and I was actually chosen from, I think, over 100 people that Judy interviewed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I interview over 100 people. I'm the culprit.
Yes, and it's certainly a pleasure being part of this project.
Yeah,
It's been life-changing.
thank you. Jackie, do you want to add to that? Like how we found each other?
Well, Judy happened to me, and a year later, I actually went. It's a really interesting story, but I actually received an e-blast, and it was an event that was happening, a Latina summit happening nearby me, literally maybe 15 minutes away from me. And being an entrepreneur for 25 years, I've been to so many networking, so many conferences, so many of everything. And I was like, okay, and this is a Latina event. I hope this is not about bochinche, which is gossip. And, all these little corners, people are here, people are there. And I value my time. So I if I go to a place, I go with intentions. And intention is to learn, to see what I'm taking home with me. And like I said, when I first started just answering this question, Judy happened to me. I stood there to the very end. It was it was just so powerful. It was empowering, that I wanted more. And as soon as Judy said something about the book, I was like, yes, 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 I'm there. So that's my
Yeah.
story.
So also, just so you know, the foundation was just formed. We started working on the foundation in December. The book was launched last year. I believe was launched on October 3rd, and then October 11th, the hard copy came. And so the foundation then was launched in December. So the foundation came after, but the foundation, it was always the first thought. We always wanted to start with a foundation. We didn't have the right people. And so what the book did, it was bringing all these amazing women together. We interviewed them. I interviewed them, each one of them. And then we created this amazing Breaking the Glass Ceiling book. And somebody is asking a question for you, Nelly. Says, I'm interested to know about Nelly running for office and what that experience was like. I grew up in the North Shore of Maine. It can be a very welcoming area, but in the current political climate, wondering what you face. Congratulations. I'm sure you will make a difference for your community.
Thank you for that question. So it was interesting because when I got on the phone and I was doing my door knocking, I was asked questions like, what party are you affiliated with? And it something triggered in my head of like, we think we know policy and politics, but in reality, not everybody knows much about policy and politics. They just know what the news portrays. So I had to educate a lot, as city council is bipartisan, and then have the conversation of let's get to know each other. What are the things that are bothering you in our town? What are the things you like? And having them connect with me so that I can get a buy-in from them. And what I realized is that it was really a treat because the power of asking is so powerful that as soon as someone feels identified with you in anything you've discussed with them, whether it's with your children or with the community or with your lifestyle, anything, or with the coffee you enjoy, it's amazing. They continuously show up for you over and over again. And what that does also is I felt is that they felt identified with me as a someone running for office, but they also felt that if you can do it, I can do it. And so that triggered me mentoring. I have a lady I met at the Inspirational Latina event that I am mentoring for a local office in the state of Connecticut. I have another lady I'm mentoring for the state of Massachusetts and for elections in 2025. So for me, that's a way of giving back for those that showed up for me, whether they know it or not, right? So I think if that's in your, I feel when they ask this question about politics, it might be something that you've thought of or maybe contemplating. And if you are, I want you to make that happen for yourself.
That's awesome. And the question about why the book came about. So part of I'm a coach and I coach a lot of women's like Latinas and non-Latinas from every walk of life. And one of the things that I saw that is a prominent thing is the underrepresentation and the stereotyping of women in general, and especially Latinos. Like in our community, we're a hardworking community. We're 19% of the population in the United States. Yet we are underrepresented. So whenever there is a challenge, the majority of people in our community say, you know, we don't complain much about, we do something about it. So that's why the book came about, to change the narrative and to make sure that, because we don't have a lack of leaders, we have a lack of platform. And that's why the foundation was created, to create that platform, not only for Latinas, but for people in general. And somebody's asking, have you seen men ever allies in the struggle? I cannot find the right people, and I am and I am in a make heavy industry. Have you seen men ever be allies in the struggle? Okay, I cannot find the right people. So what do you think? Who wants to take on that question, ladies? Go ahead, Adriana.
Yeah, as you were talking earlier, I was thinking about that. I would never be where I got in my military career, in this field, that in all my businesses now, had it not been for male mentors, because I have also always been in a male dominated industries. And it's always taken a male to say, hey, I'll help you. I'll step up. You know, I ask and they're like, absolutely, I'll help you. They give me information. They tell me where to go, write me letters of recommendation. So absolutely, there are men. You cannot get, because it's male dominated almost everywhere, you can't sneak in. You have to go through oftentimes a male, and it's okay. They're not our enemies. I have plenty of male allies. A lot of my best friends are males because I was in a male, in the military. So lots of help and lots of openness to coaching and to mentoring and to actually checking boxes that had to say yes and go up through the chain. So yeah, absolutely.
And Janet, I know that for you, that was a huge challenge, because there was this male person who, and you can, when you buy the book, and I hope that you get the book, you can read Janet's chapter about that specific, like one of the male co-worker tried to take away her practice, but then Janet, another person really helped you, which was a male too. Go ahead.
Yes, it was actually my mentor as well who gave me the opportunity to break into the industry by allowing me to get my license under his brokerage. And so he did give me that opportunity, and I'm forever grateful. I do have other male mentors that in this industry that, worked with me throughout. So I definitely agree that, yes, we do have angels that are males.
Yeah. And I think part of the challenge is like, just ask, like, what's the worst that's gonna happen? Some people will say no and laugh in your face, which that happened to me. And some other people will understand where you're coming from and they'll respect you. So yes. So Lourdes, somebody was saying that to congratulate you, to continue your work, and you want to say anything about that, and why you continue the work that you're doing, especially now with the foundation?
one of the fascinating things I hear from everyone's response and that I believe to be true is that it's all a numbers game. And for every person that we find that does not support us, there's a person who does. There is no way that I can stand here and say that I've gotten to the places I've gotten if it hadn't been for someone taking the time to take me under consideration, to figure out how to help me, to figure out how to introduce me to the right people. So for every person that said, I think you have to aim lower, I think you have to look at alternatives, there was another person who said, how can I get you up there? And so it is truly my pleasure to have been part of the UNH community for 4 years, and being in the Alumni Association just allows me to step my foot back in without having to go undercover as a student, which has not worked out for me. But it's truly a pleasure to continue to be a part and to give back. I did while I was on campus. I've always known the importance of what one person can do, that we can make a difference, that if we take someone under our wing, that if we help another person, that if we make a space that is comfortable for others, great things can happen. And I think the thing about that is that we can't even tell what it is. And we don't know. We could be impacting someone in a way that years later could come back and say, one person said something and it changed the way I looked at things. So I want to encourage everyone to get involved, to speak up, to say the things that you need, to seek, support if you feel like you need it, and to take care of yourself. So it's truly a pleasure.
Awesome. And we're almost closing our session today. Somebody's asking, do you feel like remote work has impacted the dynamic for women in a positive way? Sometimes I feel like it helps work balance, but it also puts more on our plate. And I see that Nelly started to answer that question. Nelly, you wanted to answer that for everybody?
Yeah, so my response was that I do feel remote work has put more on all of our plates. I think even as men that are doing remote work now, because if you look at, there's always laundry, there's always cooking, there's always, walking your dog, so I said, I like hybrid, but I like remote, but I love hybrid, because hybrid gives you the opportunity to go back into a space where you can connect, socialize, show up. I call it get pretty and make that money. So I feel that I do agree that remote takes away from us. We think we gain more by it. I personally feel it puts a lot of pressure on us as moms, as wives, as just sisters, daughters, because guess what? Nelly works from home now. So who's available to do this errand for me? And so that's what people think. So hybrid is the way.
Awesome. So now I'm going to leave you with Lourdes. Lourdes, thank you for having us today. How do people get in touch with Inspirame Latina? And go ahead, do the closing. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, amazing ladies. I love you. Thank you for your amazing ability to be vulnerable.
Thank you, Judy. I want to thank all participants for signing up and for coming in to learn more today. I'm going to do a few plugs here. Please utilize the link for the 603 challenge. It's going to be over in like a day or two, and we just want to hear from as many alumni as we can. UNH has over 300,000 living alumni, and we want to stay in touch. There is a lot to be learned here. We will also provide a link to the Inspirame Latina Foundation. One of the things that we are doing as the foundation is gathering information to figure out how to better serve our community. We had a summit about 3 weeks ago where we got amazing feedback, and we're already working on ways that we can serve. I want to thank the Jennifer Woodside and the Alumni Director Board that has helped with setting this up and making today possible. And I love Nayli's point about being hybrid. These webinars make it possible to attend something that I normally would not have driven an hour up to Durham to do the learning. But not only are these webinars being offered to enrich us, but we also can have a replay and we can have it back so that we can figure out the things that we need to draw from it. So I love the opportunities that it gives. And with that, thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Amazing. Thank you, ladies.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.